And I'm back. Devlog number 6. Yeah, I know, more than a month since the last devlog, I was busy working on the house. In this devlog, I will talk about water blur, flowers, wheel tracks, suspensions, blinkers, boost trails, performance optimization, more scenery, emissive surfaces. The most important part, the very first multiplayer feature, whispers. Let's go through all the little updates first. For the water, Sunag, the main author behind TSL, sent me 2 lines of code to create a blurry water surface. Yep, only 2 lines of code, which were more than welcome since I wanted a better visual separation between air and water. It's a hashed blur, meaning that it will pick neighbor pixels to make the picture look blurry. I don't know if you can notice it with the video compression, but using a hash makes it look more crispy, which I actually like better than a traditional blur. I can also use the depth to control the blur radius, but it comes at a slight performance price, so I will keep it somewhere and decide later. Flowers were looking off, and even though I like the idea of making them glow in the night, it was weird and too flashy. I improved the geometry and removed the glow. Don't worry, more glowy stuff in a minute. Wheel tracks were working nice on the grass, but we could see the terrain fake shadow under it. I used the same wheel tracks render target that I used for the grass, but this time to change the color of the terrain so that there is dirt where the wheels went. And since the light bounce uses this exact same node, the color blends perfectly with the environment. Oh, and I stumbled upon a happy accident while doing so. I might use it later. I finally added suspensions to the car, and by suspensions I mean silly tubes between the wheels and the car body. I initially wanted springs, but my attempt didn't come out well with too many faces, looking bad, or both. I added a structure wrapping the wheel like a mudguard so that I could connect the tube directly to it. Since the car looks modern, I think it works pretty well. By the way, if you wonder how I animated those suspensions, I already had the rapier suspension length to position the wheel, and I simply subtracted the distance from the wheel center to the base of the suspension and used the result to scale the suspension. Remember the previous blinkers? I was switching the side headlights on and off, a nice idea but not looking that great. So I created separated blinkers with a slightly warmer color. I also improved the interval to make it more like modern cars in terms of synchronization. We can even activate the warnings by pressing both left and right, which is totally intended and not a happy bug. Remember when I said that I needed better visual feedback for the boost? Well, there you go. Boost trails are coming out from the stoplights, which is totally physically accurate. To create this effect, I first created a tube matching the exact shape of the stoplight. In a data texture, I stored an history of the stoplight position that I update on each frame. Yes, much like the wheel tracks I explained in the previous devlog. And since it's a very small buffer, updating it on each frame shouldn't be too bad in terms of performance. Finally, I moved and rotated the vertices of the tube according to that buffer. Like for the fat line I mentioned in the previous devlog, it's probably one of the worst way to rotate vertices, but I'm not very good at that. I will probably run some tests at some point and try to optimize those trails. For the color, I used both the progress on the geometry and a Fresnel, with a lovely gradient created using a 2D canvas, and ended up with a nice result. And obviously, I made it glow in the dark. Remember the snow from the previous devlog? In order to have as few vertices as possible, I created a plane big enough to fill the view, made it follow the car on the X and Z axes, and I rounded the position to the nearest subdivision in order to avoid shaky vertices. I realized I could do the same for the terrain and went from 66,000 vertices to only 2,300 vertices. And I love to see the effect in action. And finally, more scenery. I've added fences, slabs, a bridge, and little lanterns inspired by some areas I saw in Genshin Impact. More than just adding objects to the scene, they have physics. I can create them in Blender and I can control their physical properties like weight, friction, and restitution using Blender's custom properties. I'm not a big fan of the way I create and update scenery objects. Currently, for each dynamic object, and by dynamic I mean an object that can be pushed, I create an empty in which I create two empties named visual and physical. The visual one will be used in three.js and the physical one will be parsed. If a mesh inside the physical is named cube, I will create a rapier cuboid collider for that object. And if the name is tree mesh, I will use the geometry position attribute to create a rapier tree mesh, etc. It's silly and I need a lot of empties in the graph tree, but that's the simplest solution I came up with for now, and I can export almost everything at once. If you guys have better ideas, I'm all ear. Right now, the landing area is overloaded, and it's hard to move around, but don't worry, I will do some level design once everything is working. Glowing objects weren't looking too bad. But while working on the lanterns, I realized that having some color variations would be really nice. To create this effect, I calculated a radial gradient based on the geometry's UV and used it to mix between two warm colors. And since it was looking really good, I applied it to the pole lights and the vehicle headlights. And now, le clou du spectacle, whispers. Remember in one of the early devlog where I mentioned multiplayer features? Well, here's the first one. Whispers are messages that anyone can post, and those messages are visible to everyone. A little bit like Souls-like games. It might not look like much, but oh boy, that was difficult. First, I needed to have some kind of real-time database. When a user posts a message, it needs to be saved somewhere. Every current user on the website will need to receive that new message, and new visitors would need to see all the current messages when arriving on the portfolio. I first went for a solution I had a little bit of experience with, Firebase. Everything was going well until I realized this in the pricing: monthly active users. Even though I'm not using actual authentication methods for the visitors, if I want the user to be able to send and receive messages, it needs to be considered as an anonymous, and an anonymous user counts in those quotas. These days, I'm getting near 60,000 visitors per month on my old portfolio. I don't know how many visitors I got on the release, but I know it was a lot more, and I hope to reproduce that. So it's a no-go for Firebase. I then started digging Supabase, one of the Firebase competitors. Well, first, it's a really nice platform, and integration was quite easy with a nice documentation. I got to play a lot with Postgres, created some functions and triggers to manage the whispers, and again, while everything was working so well, I realized one issue in the pricing: 5 million messages per month. Just so you understand, every time an update is made on the Whispers table, one message is being sent to every current visitor. Let's do some math with an imaginary and not realistic situation. If I have 100 users at the same time on the portfolio and they all post one message, it's 100 users sending one message to the database that is then being broadcasted to the other 99 users, and they do that once a day. So let's say 30 times a month. That's already 300,000 messages. Still quite far from the 5 million, but here's the catch. I might get more users, they might post a lot of whispers, some of them might try to break the system, and I have other multiplayer features I want to implement. I could try to add limitations, prevent bad behaviors, etc., but with anonymous authentication it's going to be hard and I will always be worried. Even though Supabase is really nice, I need another solution. And I knew deep down that if I want full control with minimal risks,
fine. I'll do it myself.
So I started working on my own Node.js application. To store and update data, I went for Postgres. This way I could reuse some of the queries I implemented in Supabase. To communicate with the users, I went for WebSocket and I used the WS library. Until now, I was using Socket.io, but I've heard WS provides more optimized way to send data, and I was curious to try this library. WS can only be used on the server side, but implementing WebSocket on client side is quite simple and doesn't really require any library. I also used Message Pack or MSG Pack to send the data as binary. Before I talk about how I handle the whispers on the front side, I need to talk about hosting the application. I'm not aware of the hosting trends when it comes to Node.js application these days, but I was happy to see that AutoSwitch, the host I've been using recently for some of the websites I manage, was supporting Node.js. But after hours of struggling to make the WebSocket work, I asked their support what was going wrong and they informed me that WebSocket is not supported. How disappointing, especially since I couldn't find this information anywhere. So I went for what seems to be the most common solution these days, Hostinger. I bought a VPS, installed Ubuntu because that's the environment I'm most comfortable with, set up the server, and boom, my Node.js app was online. I really hope the app will run smoothly. Anyway, I have some optimization tricks up my sleeve in case they are needed. Now that the server side is out of the way, let's talk about the front side, which is composed of 3 parts: the flames, bubbles, and message writing. Flames are visible wherever there is a whisper. I created an alpha map using various radial gradients. I also created a gradient using a 2D canvas with my favorite combination of colors these days. Yeah, it's nearly the same as for the boost trails. I created a plane geometry with vertical subdivision only, so that I could animate the vertices horizontally using the Perlin textures I used previously, like a flame would do. I used the alpha map to control both the gradient and the alpha with some remapping. I boosted the color so that it glows in the dark, and here is a nice little flame. Finally, I use an instance mesh to display multiple flames with good performance. When getting close to a flame, the message appears with a simple white text on black background. The trick here is that there is only one bubble that I move and animate according to which whisper is the closest. For the text, I use a 2D canvas in which I write the message. The texture is quite small, 1024 by 64, so it shouldn't be too bad in terms of performance, especially since I only update it when the text changes. I animated the bubble to show up with a nice elastic animation and to hide with a simple easing. For the font, I used Amatic SC, which is available on Google Fonts. I discovered this font while playing Void Train and spent at least half an hour looking for it. Nice little game, by the way, if you are looking for co-op games. And finally, big question, how does the user write a message? Well, I'm not proud of it, but I went for an interface. I know I really wanted to have everything in-game for immersion and performance, but providing all the necessary information while having an intuitive UX felt impossible without an interface. So I opened up Figma, did some design, and integrated it in HTML CSS, which made me realize that it's been a while I haven't done that. Anyway, the model is quite simple. It opens when pressing T. There is a preview of the whisper on the left, a description with bullet points on the right, an input, and a submit button. And cool tricks, changing the text in the input updates the preview, and writing in the preview also works. I plugged that interface to the whispers mechanic, and there you go. And since it's connected to the Node.js application hosted on Hostinger, everybody sees the whispers. I'm sure I forgot some aspect, and letting anyone posting on my portfolio is probably a bad idea, but I really want this feature to work. I obviously implemented some limitation, like session restrictions, IP restrictions, profanity controls, and other security features that I will keep secret. Finally, only 50 whispers can be seen at a given time on the portfolio. Any new whisper will delete the old ones. The whole Node.js, Postgres, Hostinger, etc. thing is quite new to me. I probably did a few mistakes along the way, so if you have any advice, please tell me in the comments. Now that the whispers are working, I have a good base for more multiplayer features, and I already have some ideas I want to implement. I will keep improving the scenery and maybe start working on displaying the actual info a portfolio should provide, but there's also this rapier bug I'm having. Whenever the frame rate isn't perfectly stable, the vehicle starts shaking around. I tried tweaking the time step, I tried changing the update order and tested various properties, but with no success. I noticed that it might be a common issue since I found other examples having the exact same problem. At this point, I might consider switching to another physics engine. If anyone has any idea what's going on and how to fix it, I'm desperate, please help. And don't forget to follow me on X or Blue Sky for granular updates, and I will see you in the next devlog.